idiomatic versus classical giraffe. Idiomatic really means like street giraffe. It's how do you talk in a normal way even though you're using these principles of nonviolent communication. Whereas classical giraffe is using something that is called the four-step process in nonviolent communication. So that classical giraffe would be looking at observation, feeling or feelings, needs, and requests. So those are the four steps. What am I observing that is free of evaluation? What are the feelings that I have connected to that observation? What are the needs that I have connected to that observation and those feelings? And what requests might I make to resolve the situation, in my desire to resolve the situation? So that would be classical. So let's see, a classical example might be when I made you dinner and you chose not to eat it, I felt sad because my needs for contribution and connection weren't met. Would you be willing to make me dinner tonight and eat with me? So that would be a classical form of giraffe. There's an observation, there's feelings, there's needs, and then there's a request, very, very succinctly. Now, street giraffe is going to use all those principles, but it's not going to sound so, I'm going to call it mechanical, right? There's a framework to the classical giraffe that sometimes doesn't meet people's longing for authenticity. They're like, hey, would you just talk normal, please? So that's one of the challenges, is the framework is super important, like learning the four steps, really understanding them. It's really important to understand the framework. Think of it as like the framing on a house. You want to have a solid framing before you build your house. If the framing isn't solid, the house won't be solid. So you can think about classical giraffe and the OFNER, the four-step process, observation, feelings, needs, requests, as that framework. The idiomatic or street giraffe is being able to utilize that framework, but now you have it in a way that is a natural expression of who you are. And so then using the same example about dinner, I might say, hey, last night when I made you dinner and you didn't want to eat it with me, I felt sad. I'd really love for us to have dinner together. Do you share that? Is that important to you? So it's a little bit of a variation. I'm using something that's a bit easier. But maybe you can hear it's not quite as mechanical there. Now, this would also show up if we're giving empathy. We're doing empathic receiving of another person. So maybe they express an upset. I had shared before that there was a woman who had shared with me what she had gone through in terms of discovering that her ex-husband had a child that she didn't know about until just recently. So it's been many, many, many years later, but it was a new realization for her. So classical giraffe would be, again, observation. When you told me that you discovered that your children have a half-sibling, I imagine, so we're going to go into feeling, I imagine that you felt shocked and surprised and disheartened, and that your needs were for trust, for stability, and for well-being for your family. And then the request would be something like, would you let me know if I understood you correctly? So that would be a very classical form of giraffe, right? I'm reflecting back the observation, feeling, need, request. A street giraffe, idiomatic giraffe, upon hearing a story like that, I just go, wow, that's a lot to learn. Let me just take a moment with that. Oh, yeah, I would imagine that would have been a shocking piece of news. Yeah. Probably a bit destabilizing too. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So you just found about this recently? Like, you want to connect with the person. Really, really be with them. So, I would still check in and say, do you feel heard and seen and understood by me? I just want to really make sure that you're feeling cared for in this conversation. So a street giraffe will not necessarily use the phrasing when I heard, when I saw, these phrasings that are used to indicate an observation. They won't necessarily say, I imagine that you felt, or I imagine that you needed. I would guess that you were feeling. I would guess that you were needing. Those are classical phrases that we're going to use in classical giraffe. Would you be willing to? That's a great one to use regardless of whether you're using classical giraffe or street giraffe. If those are not your words, find your words that are similar to that. Again, one of the challenges, though, with street giraffe is that you want to make sure you've got your framework first. If you don't really clearly understand observations versus evaluations, which that was one of the earlier key distinctions, if you don't really understand the clear feelings or emotions versus emotions that are mixed with thought or evaluation, that will, again, make it a less powerful structure for what you're doing. If you don't clearly understand needs, universal needs versus strategies to meet those needs, you got to understand these parts, right? And if you don't understand requests versus demands or that piece, it makes it hard for you to do street giraffe really according to the principles. So I really want to encourage you to learn the principles, use the framework when you're talking with people in practice groups. Just really practice the framework because it's going to help to shift your thinking into this compassionate consciousness, into really understanding the principles. And you might notice that when you're talking to people who are not in this NVC world, if you use a classical form of giraffe, they're going to say, you sound funny. What cult did you join? Or, something like that. Because it just doesn't sound natural, right? It's not the you that they've always known. So you can say, well, I'm practicing nonviolent communication, and then you can use the classical form and just really practice it with them. You can say, let me just pull out some cards, because that's a way that you can be street giraffe and still be using the principles, right? Because you can pull out cards that say, I'm guessing that you're feeling, I'm guessing you're needing, and then you can pull out cards to guess what it is. And then you're playing a game, so it kind of makes it easier to do a workaround so that you can really practice that framework and practice the skills without sounding like you're using a framework or having people question whether you're being authentic or not. Over time, as you build this vocabulary into your knowledge set, as you build the principles into your knowledge set, it'll be easier to really just speak from your heart and utilize those principles. So then you'll be able to make that shift into idiomatic or street giraffe, so that you're speaking naturally. You've created new habits which are life affirming, which are a wonderful giraffe. And you don't have to give up the jackal. You're still welcome to be the jackal when you want. Just you'll have awareness and choice around when you're doing that. So that is that differentiation around the idiomatic or street giraffe versus that classical four-step Offner giraffe.